Michael Irons and the Great Continent by Nathan Moore. Chapter 2 Respite and Request. With stoic satisfaction to be free and on solid ground once more, Michael Irons trekked through the eastern coastal forests of the vast Asian continent. Knowing of the expansive scope and myriad legends of the lands ahead, inspired within Irons a swelling anticipation, the likes of which he had not experienced in some years. Were he still young, his eyes would likely have become overwhelmed with infatuation, taking in little and missing much. But the measured sobriety of age and experience kept his pace at its customary meter, measured and swift but not hasty, lest he overlook the most minute indication of potential evil. Thus did he travel, clothed and armed as he had long since been wont, a worn, wide-brimmed hat and garments of black, aged leather gloves and boots black as well, his lanky, wolfish form obscured within a black cloak, concealing also twin flintlock pistols and, with decent efficiency, even a two-handed greatsword, despite the modern warfare's customary pike and shot. Cold blue eyes glinted hungry from beneath the wide brim, a solitary shadow, eager to hunt whatever manner of evils plagued the Orient. After some days, Irons began to notice a thinness upon the forest floor, indicating to him local foraging, likely a constant search made by a nearby village to bolster meals and stores so their fields did not shoulder the entire burden of their community's sustenance. To remove all question as to a nearby hamlet, as Irons moved forward, his passage suddenly revealed a young boy of perhaps 6 stood behind a large tree. The sudden presence startling Irons so completely, he was almost frozen where he stood, flat-footed, as if a thief caught mid-trespass. For a moment, the small child gazed at the black-clad, pale-skinned stranger with large, dark eyes. Then the boy did not scream. He did not even seem startled. To the shock of Irons, instead, the boy, appearing bemused and gleeful, approached him with dutiful step, took his leather-gloved hand with his small, gentle fingers, and began to lead him. Irons, bewildered and intrigued by the strangeness of this encounter, allowed himself to be led without hesitation. He was guided unerringly to a path in the forest where the foreign trees around him began to grow less frequent. This path led out from the forest and onto a grassy knoll tucked against some grand hills, which in turn looked down upon a great plateau, the far edge of which oversaw a green sea of vast forest beyond. Contained within the plateau, nestled into the hills, was a farming village, and this was where the child led Irons. To the eye of Michael Irons, the simple hamlet was picturesque, as if manifested from a fairy tale, its scenery idyllic, the people content, the serene peace pervasive almost to the point of being incongruous with reality. He was led down the clean, flat dirt pathways, the people of the village absent wealth, yet none seemed to starve, and each one gazed upon him with bright eyes. Upon seeing Irons, their reactions to this foreign stranger ranged from stares at what must have been a very odd and novel sight, to a few mysteriously knowing smiles, as faces turned politely away so as not to gawk. The child led Irons finally to a house in a place of prominence at the end of the path. The position Irons saw seemed oriented with intent, though not aligned to the points of a compass, and so he wondered if perhaps there was a spiritual or astrological motive in how it faced. After being silently instructed to remove his worn black boots, this done with the stern but endearing pantomime of a child taking his duty very seriously, Irons was led inside. In the middle of the large room was a round table, rustic but clean and smooth, upon which was being poured green tea into a second prepared cup. Pouring this was a very old man, short and bald, thin and wrinkled, his slender eyes almost disappearing behind tanned cheeks as he smiled with radiant warmth upon his guest. He was quintessential, not only of Oriental elders, but of all such individuals the world over, and Michael Irons felt instilled within his breast an immediate sense of ease and near reverence for the old man. He crossed the room and knelt before the table where the elder had pushed the poured cup, then removed his wide-brimmed black hat, setting it beside himself as the boy sat against a wall in polite silence but enthusiastic attendance. Irons took the cup offered and drank. The green tea was unfamiliar, but the novelty of the strange and bitter draught was found to have an appeal, or perhaps his English soul was simply glad to have tea of any kind. He bowed graciously and smiled his approval at his host, who inclined his head a little to receive the compliment. The old man then stood, with a smooth ease Irons found impressive for one so old, and walked to the wall across from Irons. He brushed his fingers across the off-white stucco walls and seemed to push. The wall moved away as if on rollers and vanished into thin air, letting in the midday light and allowing an impeccable view of the vast forest beneath the village. The old man smiled to Irons and rapped a knuckle upon the open air, eliciting from the empty space a knock as if the wall stood there still and had merely been made invisible. "I was almost 20 when I first managed that," spoke the old man merrily, astonishing Irons even more than the disappearing wall. This was not just because he spoke English, but because the English was uttered in the accent of a kindly local northern lord who took the stewardship of his fief with sincere humility. Irons, suddenly suspicious, shot a glance at the boy who still sat against the wall to his left, arms about his knees. But the boy's wide and gleeful smile appeared delighted at the guest's perplexed features, no malice or eerie expectation to be seen. Irons, not completely convinced, looked toward the elder again. "I apologize for my suspicion," said Irons, "but when I am occupied by the weird, it is most often wicked." The old man raised his palms for a moment in defense and mock surrender. "I am aligned with no entity or power. My capabilities appear to you like magic in the way your pistols would create superstitious fear in the hearts of a primitive tribesman. Then might I beg an explanation?" The old man seemed to weigh his words as he returned to the table and sat down at cross-legged ease once more. "I understood mathematics before language. I still remember plainly seeing the numbers and their expressions as equations laid out before me like a golden thread, weaving together everything. Then, one day, I was looking into the river to watch and feel the flow of information as I had done many times before, and then it unified. The numbers ran into the water expressed itself as clearly as the simplest equations ever had, and I began to see." He considered a moment, then reached out a finger and touched the air beside him, which rippled gently, and from his touch slim ripples lazily fled, as if he had startled a great fish just below the surface of a still lake. "I began to see the equations bend or funnel, like water adjusting to a river's course. I learned how to see beyond sight, to see those stones the water moved around, and then to touch and interact with them, if only a little. And in seeing the river of reality, so too did I begin to see its conjoined twin, time. Within my own little river bend I could clearly see what was, little of where it had been, and where it would very likely be." He smiled as if a little embarrassed, but seemed to dismiss whatever thought he had and moved on. "I saw you coming downstream, so to say," the old man chuckled. "This was how I was able to have my great-grandson fetch you." "Fetch me," repeated Irons, turning the elder's words over in his head. "If you see the world as you claim, then you must know what preoccupies me." The old man smiled. "A very strange fish indeed, even in your own land." "And you did not simply watch the fish pass by?" Irons noticed pointedly, but not unkind, and he leaned forward with a firm, engaged smile of his own. Considering that, I must ask, what, pray tell, do you wish of me? The old man's eyes lowered and grew gentle. I require a champion. Michael Irons almost frowned at the notion, for the old man's powers seemed considerable, but then he realized it is unwise for a king to participate in combat direct, and therefore seeks an appropriate champion. It is as you say. The old man nodded but held up a brief warning hand. Yet do mind the implication of danger. I know your capabilities. I can read these written upon you as plainly as physical scars and marks. I can even see the shadows of things you have encountered. The old man seemed to examine something deeper for a moment, then stopped himself with a shake of his head. He inadvertently shuddered and said, Regardless, I must caution you. What I ask will put you in great peril, and where I send you would put you beyond my aid. Michael Irons remained stoic, but his cold eyes glittered with expectation, mind already concluded.